I begged them, "Lily is your granddaughter, she's dying." But in their mansion, filled with music and champagne, they turned away. That was the day I walked out and decided I'd never call them my parents again. Claire is my name. I'm from Denver, Colorado, and I'm 32 years old. I run a small business that specializes in developing living areas, from townhouses and apartments to tiny cafes that customers wish to turn into emotionally charged locations. Although I'm not rich, I make enough money to support my husband, myself, and my 8-year-old daughter, Lily, who is the source of my joy. My parents, Richard and Victoria, have always wished for others to believe that my family is not from an upper-class background. I grew up in a household that valued appearances above all else. My mother always carried pricey handbags and talked in a formal, measured tone, while my father owned a renowned furniture store in town. For them, success was about getting praise from others, not about having peace of mind. From the outside, they appeared to be a perfect pair, brimming with affection and tenderness. On the inside, though, I understood that their affection was never shared equally. Brandon, my younger brother, is 2 years younger than myself. I was taught early on that hard work did not necessarily translate into recognition in my family. My mother just replied, "Good," when I received a perfect score on my arithmetic test in the 8th grade. "You fulfilled your obligations." However, the entire family threw a small celebration, complete with cake and laughter, when Brandon received a B+ in history. They cheered as though Brandon had just won a full scholarship to Harvard, and I watched from the kitchen corner. I never held my brother responsible. Brandon didn't need to make an effort to win affection. He only needed to be there, and people would find him. I was the other way around. I put a lot of effort into my studies, took a part-time job at 16 to pay for my own books, and entered college without my parents even saying, "Well done." My mother hardly gave a nod when I informed them that I had been admitted to a Chicago architectural program. It must have been difficult. Nevertheless, they organized a departure party, hired a live band, and bombarded social media with the phrase, "So proud of our beloved son," after Brandon was accepted to a nearby community college. I was taught to be independent from a young age. I had no expectations of them, and I eventually stopped being offended. I put a lot of effort into my work, growing my business from a shared rental office to a location of my own. Not large, but mine. While inspecting a model apartment for a new building in March, I met my husband, Daniel. He was employed to install a smart lighting system as an electrical engineer. We discussed light, color, and how a space may affect someone's feelings. We got married a year later. With a smile similar to Daniel's and inquisitive eyes similar to mine, Lily was born. We weren't wealthy for the first few years after Lily was born, but we were content. Daniel worked for a construction company, and I kept up my design business. We selected a modest apartment close to a park where we could hear kids laughing in the afternoons outside the window. Lily was a healthy, active child who always had a picture book with her. Obtaining comprehensive health insurance for our family was the one thing I had yet to do. I kept convincing myself that we could wait a little while longer because it was expensive. Our income was still erratic, and all three of us were healthy. I never imagined that my reluctance would result in a moment that would forever alter my life. A moment that would have me stand in front of my parents in complete despair, only to hear words that I can still clearly recall, word for word. At one point, I believed I had become inured to being ignored by my own family. However, it turns out that being ignored at dinner isn't always the only example of parental apathy. It can pierce deeply into the trust you believed had long since waned, like a cold, sharp sword. I recall the day Brandon was hired by a recently founded real estate company. "Exciting news for our family," was the subject line of an email my mother sent to the whole family. At a fancy Italian restaurant downtown, where a single appetizer might have covered half of Lily's monthly preschool tuition, they had a party. I went. I didn't want to shame my family, not because I wanted to praise Brandon. Despite my hectic week, I managed to show up with a simple but kind gift, an engraved fountain pen that I had monogrammed. an appropriate present for a new business owner. I gave it to Brandon, who hardly even looked at it before putting it down and going on to flaunt his new smartwatch, which was a present from his parents. To cheer myself up, I remained silent. When I launched my first design office, I had never received anything from anyone. My parents had offered no words of support, simply the words, "I hope you can figure things out when you fail." No calls to make a check-in. Over time, I came to understand that Brandon was an image investment for them, a gregarious, articulate man who knew how to make an impression. And me, the calm woman was me, the realism. Social skills are lacking, disinterested in meaningless discussions. I had no performative value in their eyes. My mother once bluntly stated, "You can't keep avoiding society like this." After I declined to go to a charity banquet she was throwing, "You are the flaw in the otherwise flawless picture of this family." She once informed me that I wasn't worthy of touching the pricey pearl necklace she wore, and I recall standing there and marveling at it. Our family got together at my parents' Boulder suburban house every Thanksgiving. The dinner was prepared with great care. The guest list, which included doctors, lawyers, and high-ranking individuals, was meticulously chosen. The echo of laughter and the flimsy compliments Brandon received always made me feel uncomfortable. No one would listen to me when I talked about my job, the projects I was enthusiastic about, or the designs I was proud of. Everyone hurried to comfort Brandon when he mentioned a failed lease deal, as though his failure was something valuable that should be fostered. My mother used to say, "Lily is adorable, but she's a bit emotionally distant," while standing in front of me and Lily and grinning sweetly, most likely as a result of her lack of interaction with her grandparents. My heart was cruelly clenching as I grabbed my daughter's hand. Lily listened to everything. She said to me, "Mommy, did I do something wrong?" That evening, "Is that the reason, Grandma?" I made an effort to smile, hugged her, and told myself that I was the one who was terrible for bringing her into that pretentious house. I made an effort to stay away. However, Daniel was continuously encouraging me to try again, to restore the familial ties. He never really got how I felt. He thought my parents were simply old-fashioned and had high expectations for their kids, and I was too sensitive and hard to relate to. Daniel wasn't at fault. He had no idea what life was like in my home as a child. He had no idea what it was like to wait for a compliment following a flawless test result, only to be dismissed with a contemptuous shrug. He had never seen his mother's dissatisfied expression when he opted for design over law or medicine, nor had he ever been constantly compared to others. I always assumed I was accustomed to it. However, I was mistaken. I trembled as the doctor informed me that Lily needed emergency surgery, and my first thought was of my parents when she dropped on the floor, her face pale and her breath feeble. I realize it sounds absurd. I am aware that they have abandoned me numerous times. However, I suddenly realized that they were Lily's grandparents. This cannot be disregarded. Not now. I had no idea that I was going to experience one of the most brutal rejections to date. As the chilly breeze filtered through the gaps in our tiny flat, it began with a cough in the midst of last October. I initially believed it to be a simple cold. She continued to playfully request Daniel's mac and cheese each night. However, the coughing continued. At night, they got worse, waking her awake and causing her to clutch her chest and gasp for air. We brought her to a clinic in the area. The doctor gave medication, advised us to keep an eye on her, and stated it was probably mild bronchitis. However, I was aware the doctor's anxious look wasn't merely a friendly reassurance. After 2 weeks, Lily began to feel tired. Every stride felt more burdensome. She was sketching one afternoon when she abruptly dropped down on the mat and muttered, "Mommy, my heart is beating too quickly." I felt her chilly skin as I held her. My own heart was racing with anxiety. I sat in the back seat with Lily, my hands shaking wildly, while Daniel drove us to the city hospital. They performed CT scans, X-rays, and blood testing. We waited in a chilly white room with fluorescent lighting that created a dreadful atmosphere. After almost 3 hours, the doctor reappeared with a heavy file in his hand, his expression so solemn that I had to grab onto the armrest for support. The doctor added cautiously, in a calm but straightforward manner, "We discovered an abnormal mass in Lily's left lung. Although its placement is pressing against her airway, it is probably benign. Should we delay surgery, her condition may rapidly deteriorate." I could feel my ears ringing. Beside me, Daniel stood motionless and unblinking. One query in a voice I hardly knew was all I could manage. "Does she require immediate surgery?" The physician gave a nod. After a brief pause, he said, "We advise moving forward as soon as possible, within the next 3 days. The cost for the surgery and post-supportive care is approximately $100,000. I went cold. I felt like I was slapped in the face by that number. I was aware that we lacked insurance. Every time I saw the monthly premiums, I kept encouraging myself to wait a little while longer, even though we had planned to sign up. Following the acquisition of the next project, we always had time, in my opinion. However, I now understand that sometimes all plans can be nullified in a single minute. My hand was squeezed by Daniel. "We'll figure something out. Please get everything ready for the procedure." After giving a nurse the paperwork and nodding, the doctor departed the room. I turned to face Daniel. I could see he was as overwhelmed as I was, even though his eyes were trying to remain composed. Our savings account was worth approximately $15,000. That was far from sufficient. I requested an emergency loan over the phone. Our credit score wasn't high enough, therefore they rejected it. In the hopes that friends would help spread the word, I shared on social media. However, the money was too much and the time was too short. I didn't get any sleep that night. I held Lily's hand as I sat by her hospital bed and listened to her faint, erratic breaths. Her face was painfully pale in the faint glare of the nightlight. I kissed her forehead and got to my feet. I kept thinking, I can't let Lily wait here in vain. I took out my phone and phoned my mother's number, which I knew well. "Claire, why are you phoning at this hour?" She spoke softly but icily. I inhaled deeply. "Lily is at the medical facility. She needs immediate surgery. I need your aid, Mom. Please, just a portion of our money, as we don't have enough. I'll reimburse you." "Well, this is really bad timing, you know," my mother responded after a moment of silence on the other end. "Your father and I will celebrate our 40th wedding anniversary next week. Everything is set up. There are a lot of guests invited. Claire, it would be really inconvenient to put it off now." My knuckles went white from holding my phone so hard. I said, "I'm not asking you to call off your party. Just a little. Your granddaughter is named Lily. Her situation is critical." Her tone became severe. "You already know this, Claire. We cannot allow a personal issue to damage the family's reputation. I'm sorry, but I'm unable to assist you." I was at a loss for words. I ended the call. My chest hurt more because the last bit of hope I had was dashed, not because I was rejected. Upon returning to Lily's bedside, I embraced her petite frame and said to myself, if my own family could abandon their own granddaughter, then I have nothing left to lose. After spending almost a restless night with Lily, I made the decision to do something I had vowed never to do again the next morning. Go back to my parents' estate. Do you think I can manage that? Squeezing a handful of my hair to keep myself grounded, I asked myself, if I went, I was aware that they might reject me, or worse, figure out a method to act as though I didn't exist. I pulled my hair down, put on a black coat, and got into Daniel's old car while holding tight to Lily's medical paperwork. The driveway was full of high-end vehicles when I got there. Glasses clinking and laughing, mingled with soft music coming from the backyard. Gold ribbons, shimmering crystal lights, and white flowers adorned the magnificently decorated mansion. After a few moments, I realized that today was the rehearsal party for Brandon's engagement to Sophie, the daughter of a local real estate mogul. The weight of the well-dressed people's attention hit me as soon as I entered the enormous lobby. No one inquired about my origins or offered me a drink. Their eyes skimmed over me like I was a lost waiter who had stumbled into the wrong area. I saw my mom smiling with some of the older visitors across the room while holding a champagne glass. I approached her directly and came to a stop directly in front of her. With an urgent tone, I begged, "Mom, please give me 5 minutes. It's crucial." She gave me a sidelong glance, her face briefly unhappy, as though I had interrupted a crucial discussion. "I'm hosting visitors, Claire. Can you wait?" With a shaky but forceful voice, I shook my head. "No, it has to do with Lily. She need immediate surgery. I urge you, Mom, just contribute a little bit toward the expense. We have already sold all of our inventory." She was momentarily hesitant. Then her eyes became icy. "Do you know what day it is today, Claire?" My mom said, "This is a pre-wedding celebration for Brandon. Months have been spent planning everything. Wouldn't there have been a better moment?" I took a deep breath, reached inside my bag, and opened the medical records in front of her. "Please, Mom, take a look at this. According to the doctor, Lily might not live if she doesn't get surgery right away. We require $100,000. She's your granddaughter, Mom." As the music slowed, I saw that some nearby people had begun to pay attention. A couple in the area took a step back and observed. After looking around, my mother leaned down and lowered her voice. "Claire, you're making me look foolish. We shouldn't talk about this here. I'm sorry, but I'm powerless to assist. The band, the wedding gown, and the caterers have already been paid for. Now, where do you think I'll find almost $100,000? My father was there when I turned. He stood next to Brandon and other smartly dressed males. My father scowled as I approached them. "What's going on, Claire? You came here to make a scene, right?" "No," I said bluntly. "I came to ask for your help. Lily requires surgery. I only require a percentage of the price. She's your granddaughter, please, Dad." Brandon laughed quietly, his voice as keen as a dagger but as light as air. "Are you serious? The entire family must now shoulder the burden since you failed to plan ahead. You expect me to cancel everything since I'm getting married soon. Don't be too self-centered." For the first time in years, my eyes met Brandon's as I turned to face him. I just caught a glimpse of the hollowness that lay beneath his self-assured smile. "I'm not requesting it. All I can hope is that your conscience is still intact." Brandon lifted his glass of champagne and shook his head. "My future is my main concern. Claire, everyone has their own issues. Your daughter is named Lily. Not my job." My voice was shaking as I turned back to my parents. "I'm not making any requests for myself. Please save Lily, I beg you. This family is descended from her. Is a family truly a family if its members fail to support one another during difficult times?" With a sigh, my father turned away, like though I were a mere breeze. "Please don't make us any more uncomfortable, Claire." I stood in the center of the opulent ballroom, surrounded by individuals who used to refer to me as the nice daughter and sparkling lights. Brandon's sister, the child of Richard and Victoria. However, they simply gave me uncomfortable, pitying, or worst, uninterested looks tonight. I nodded, put the medical paperwork back in my suitcase, and left the opulent estate where I used to live. The stone pathway felt like a blow to my chest with each stride. My tears finally came when I climbed into the car and settled in. Not out of suffering, but rather from the sobering insight that to them, a lavish celebration was more significant than a child's life. I had changed from the Claire who was constantly attempting to win crumbs of affection from those who were unable to provide it. I promised myself that I would stop pleading with them and do whatever it took to save my baby. I went back to the hospital, empty-handed, and with a heavy heart. I felt like the world was pressing down on my chest, and Lily was still lying there, her lips dry, her breathing shallow. I told Daniel everything, and he hugged me close. Each and every rejection, every patronizing look, the day I left that mansion feeling completely alienated. He remained silent, simply nodded. Then Daniel said, "We'll save our daughter," in my ear. "Nobody else is necessary for us." We did something the following morning. Daniel listed his cherished pickup truck, which we had used to travel across states during our honeymoon, for sale. I posted classified ads for our living room sofa, my work computer, and my printer. Someone questioned, "Are you moving to a new place?" when they arrived to look at our furnishings. I only grinned, too tired to elaborate. We were able to raise almost $30,000 in 3 days. Although it wasn't much, we were still far from our objective. I began phoning as many old friends as I could remember. A few chose not to respond. A few paused. However, there were also several that I will always remember. With the note, "I know this isn't much, but it's my entire savings for this month." My college friend Rachel, who is now a music teacher, sent me $500. Lily is going to survive. Tears filled my eyes as I read her message. At lunchtime, Ethan, a young worker who had only been with my company for 4 months, entered my office. On my desk, he put an envelope. "I have $320. I had planned to get a new laptop this morning, but I believe Lily is in more need of one." There was nothing I could say. I simply gave him a strong hug. Friends, neighbors, and even people I had only met once in my life gave us little donations. Individuals who weren't related to me by blood. They came out to help, even though they owed me nothing. Still, we were short by around $40,000. Despite being aware of the risks, I began to think about taking out high-interest loans. My heart was pounding so hard that I couldn't sleep, like it was going to explode. Then, one evening, Daniel's parents, Margaret and Edward, paid me a visit when I was sitting in Lily's hospital room. They had treasured their modest home in the southern Denver suburbs for almost 3 decades. They were not rich, just people that work hard and lead basic lives. All I wanted was a hug and some consoling words. However, Edward put his hand on my shoulder as they walked into the room and drew me aside into the hallway. "You and Daniel have to come to our house tomorrow morning, Claire," he added in a strong, unflinching voice. "I need to talk about something." I stared at him, perplexed. "What is it?" He didn't respond. He simply gave me a shoulder pat before turning to face Lily in her hospital bed, where she was lying with a scarf around her head and an IV still in her small hand. "Our granddaughter can't wait any longer," he said. Daniel and I visited their home the following morning. It was more empty than usual. A number of the artwork on the walls had been removed, as had the couch in the living room. Margaret left with a cup of hot tea, set it on the table, and gave me a stack of papers before I could ask. I grabbed them and quickly looked through them. A contract for the transfer of property. My eyes were seared by the last line. $150,000 was the sale price. Stunned, I gazed at them. "Why, Mom?" Margaret smiled softly as she clasped my hand. "To save Lily, you and Daniel need the money. This house is merely a physical object. Lily only has one life, but we can rent another place. Wouldn't you act the same way if you or Daniel were in similar circumstance?" Instead of sobbing out, I sobbed quietly as my tears fell into her hands. Lily's first winter's knitting was done by the same hands. The hands that had prepared annual Christmas confections. Despite not being my biological parents, they made the decision to support me when no one else did. We had the entire amount 3 days later. The surgery was promptly scheduled by the hospital. 6 hours were spent on the procedure. It seemed like 6 years in just 6 hours. Lily gave me a beaded necklace with the words, "Best Mom Ever," as a birthday present, and I was holding it tightly as I sat in the waiting area. He nodded and smiled slightly when the doctor eventually left. The procedure went well. Lily will get better. She has extraordinary strength. My legs failed me. I sobbed, not out of despair but out of sheer happiness that hope was alive once more, and I fell into a chair, covering my face. It was Lily who had survived. I saw her sleep soundly 3 days later in a brightly lit hospital room. Her tiny fingers instinctively gripped mine, and her breathing was calm. I was aware that things would change going forward. However, the memories of that celebration still stayed deep within me. The apathetic gazes of those who were related to me, and I vowed that one day they would know what it's like to lose something that really Danielle's. I believed that the fatigue and financial strain of the previous months would cause me to pass out after Lily's surgery and hospital discharge. However, I didn't. After years of smoldering, a fire had finally erupted within of me. My job was no longer solely to provide for my family. To return compassion, I labored. I made an effort to demonstrate to the world, and particularly to those who had abandoned me, that I could achieve without their help. I got up at 4:30 a.m. every day. Sharp. I reorganized every aspect of my business, including marketing plans and management processes. I relearned all the things I had previously forgotten because I was too busy: digital marketing, negotiation techniques, and financial management. During the day, I accompanied clients on site visits. I emailed clients throughout the state, created quotes, and drew designs at night. On the weekends, I even signed up for a real estate negotiation course. In the northern suburbs of Denver, my little interior design business, which had previously shared office space with a nail salon, began to take on larger projects, including cafes, studios, and a chain of spas. Then an Aspen boutique hotel. Word got out. I agreed to design the interiors of a high-end apartment building in the new business sector a year later. 10 times the value of any contract I had ever landed, the project was valued over $1 million. It was the pivotal moment that turned my business from a little-known brand into a dominant force in the sector. And Story on Me was published in Modern Spaces magazine with the following headline: From an ordinary mother to a woman influencing thousands of people's lives. They questioned me about what motivated me to achieve this feat. I fixed my unflinching gaze on the camera. At one point, I pleaded with my family to assist save my daughter's life. They declined. I no longer hold them responsible. But I realized then that I had to be my daughter's only source of support, and I had to get stronger than anyone who had ever attempted to break me in order to accomplish it. On social media, the interview went viral. I was admired by several. A few were moved to tears. After then, something unexpected occurred. I was asked to participate in the popular talk show Voices of Resilience, which featured tales of regular individuals triumphing against tremendous hardship. I was flown to New York. I shared my whole tale on tape, from the years I spent being compared to Brandon to the moment I knelt in front of my parents and begged them to spare Lily. The host, a wise and experienced woman, gave me a very respectful look. "Claire," she said, "what would you say to those who abandoned you during your darkest hour if you could say only one thing to them?" That. I remained quiet for a short while. Then I grinned, steadily and calmly. "I'm grateful. I no longer heedlessly pursue other people's favor because of them, and I discovered my true family as a result of them. The individuals who were prepared to sell their house in order to preserve my child's life, even though they weren't related to me." Throughout the show, I never disclosed any names. However, the people who saw me knock on the door of that mansion that day and being sent away like a stranger understood exactly who I was referring to. Hundreds of messages from moms, fathers, and kids who had been abandoned by their own families reached me after the show aired. I gave them hope, they remarked, that even when pushed to the bottom, they, too, could rise again. My business was listed as one of the top 30 most significant interior brands in the Western United States by Fortune, Home magazine a month later. On the cover, I was shown holding a blueprint while standing in the center of a building site, with a huge sign behind me that said, "Made to Restore." I refrained from crying. I was not pleased. All I felt was calm, because I was aware that the source of every action I took and every sweat drop was the same: my affection for Lily. My motivation came from her. My motivation to continue, evidence that sometimes the greatest strength comes from suffering. However, I was also aware that others who had previously abandoned me were observing, and I would always remember the look in my mother's eyes when I pleaded with her to assist her grandchild. I remembered my father nodding slightly, as though he were turning down a bad business offer. They believed that the frail Claire they knew would always be me. However, they were mistaken, and I had no doubt that they were going to understand that. When I told my tale on TV, I didn't mean to offend them. I didn't give names. I didn't blame anyone. I just spoke the truth. I had held the unvarnished truth in my heart for years. However, some realities are more powerful than accusations when they are expressed in the light. My story traveled more quickly than I anticipated when Voices of Resilience broadcast. Articles started to appear in local news outlets. Smaller television networks then requested interviews. People used the information I had provided to make connections. They quickly learned that I was the daughter of Monroe's Living's proprietors, Richard and Victoria Monroe, the sister of real estate broker Brandon Monroe, who boasted about his $330,000 engagement ring on LinkedIn. When a talk show tape was published by an unknown account with the following headline, I knew the real media storm had started. Refused to save their dying granddaughter, parents spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on an engagement party. Their daughter is now worth $1 million. In just 2 days, the Post received more than 500,000 shares. Monroe's Living soon started getting one-star reviews on all of the main platforms. Orders were canceled by customers. A few providers declared they were severing their connections. My father was silently taken off of their contact list by the same people who used to shake hands with him and toast champagne at his gatherings, because nobody wanted to be connected to a family that had abandoned its own ancestry to safeguard their standing. A week later, I learned that the store had to close for a while for both legal and financial reasons. I wasn't content. It didn't satisfy me. Just a strange void, like the reopening of an old chapter, with nothing left to conceal and everything exposed to the sun. Then there was Brandon. He used to be the family's pride and the golden child, the one who stood at formal events and gave enchanting speeches. However, many now only recall one thing anytime his name was mentioned online. When his sister pleaded for her daughter's life, the man laughed in her face. The fiancée, who was formerly thought to be his ideal match, Sophie, remained silent. She merely changed her engagement status, deleted all of their wedding pictures, and filed to call off the wedding a few days later. According to an old acquaintance, Sophie read the stories and then went straight to my parents. She moved back in with her mother as soon as they didn't deny anything, leaving the apartment she shared with Brandon. Brandon was unable to cope with the consequences. One by one, his business associates abandoned him. One night he called me. He spoke in a rough tone. "What did you do?" I remained silent. "You appeared on television. Everyone thought I was heartless because of you." I let out a slow breath. "Brandon, I didn't cause anyone to think anything. I simply spoke the truth. Nothing was twisted by me. And if the truth makes you feel guilty, then I'm not the issue." He didn't say anything. He hung up after that. That call seemed like the end to me. However, it wasn't. I got a handwritten letter a few weeks later, paper that is pale yellow. Handwriting was neat, yet a little wobbly, as though her hands were unsteady. "Claire, we've lost everything. The mansion is being sold by your father. Brandon doesn't have a job. The name of our family is in ruins. I'm not writing to point the finger at you. I have no idea what else to do, so I'm writing. We were mistaken. I am aware of that. But help us, if you have any remaining kindness." That night, I read the letter several times. In the midst of the costly wine and laughter, I remembered that mansion, the location where I was turned away. In that hospital bed, I reflected on Lily's frail breaths, the elderly hands of Daniel's parents, who sold their house to preserve their granddaughter, even though they were not related to us, came to mind. And I came to the realization that money cannot make up for all losses. I slipped the letter inside a drawer after folding it. I wasn't happy about their demise. However, I also stopped harboring bitterness. Simply put, I had a new family now, those who demonstrated love by doing rather than by boasting. And the most significant lesson I had ever learned was, not every person you are born to will stick with you through thick and thin. And I had a gut feeling that they would still get in touch with me, However, I would be the one to establish the conditions the following time. I realized something more profoundly than ever after everything that transpired. Nobody ever achieved success by himself. I worked, no Danielle how hard. Lily was still alive today, despite my strength, not only because to my determination, but also to the generosity of everyone around me. People that choose to support me when the world turned its back on me, despite not having my blood. In a notepad, I listed the names of everyone who had assisted me, to remind myself not to forget, not to keep track of bills. I didn't consider fancy vehicles or houses when my business began to turn a profit. The people who had donated their last bucks without anticipating anything in return came to mind. I invited my old buddy Rachel, who had once sent me $500, to the headquarters of my business. She continued to drive the same rusty red automobile, continued to wear the same knitted coat that she had repeatedly repaired. I gave a big envelope to her. Her eyes grew wide when she opened it. "Claire, this is—" I smiled and continued, "I know you never asked for anything. However, I want you to use this to launch the music school of your dreams. My daughter was saved by you. It's my turn now to assist you in reviving your dream." With tears running down her face, she gave me a hug. There was no need for more words. Her hug was a powerful statement. I also went to see Ethan, the young worker who had previously shared his small savings with me. He was elevated to lead designer by this point. I gave him a full scholarship to attend a famous design school in Chicago, something he had previously believed was only a pipe dream. Tears filled his eyes, yet they were accompanied by resolve. I was confident that, like me, he would transform his thankfulness into something remarkable. I owed Edward and Margaret, my in-laws, a lifetime. I could still clearly recall the day they sold their old house to save Lily and moved out. They didn't weep. They didn't voice any complaints. "Anywhere is home as long as Lily is healthy," they merely stated. However, I will never forget how they held each other close while wrapping their old dishes in newspaper in that small rental unit on the city's south side. I surreptitiously monitored real estate transactions when my firm was asked to design the interiors of a high-end residential building. They once sold their house to save their granddaughter, and I bought it back from the new owner after months of haggling. I remained silent for a while. Margaret's birthday was the date I waited for. I invited the entire family over and threw a little party that day. Lily had sketched an enormous card with shaky letters. "You saved me, Grandma and Grandpa, and for that I love you." I gave Margaret a tiny box after supper. When she opened it, she discovered a copy of the property deed and an old home key. She shuddered. She trembled. "What, Claire? What did you do?" She muttered. I just put a hand on her shoulder and grinned. "All I wanted was for you to return home." Edward remained quiet for a while. Then, as though attempting to convey 1,000 messages in a single motion, he tightened his hold on my hand. I decided to build a new house for our whole family a few months later. A modest mansion. However, a large, cozy home, enough space for Lily, Daniel, Margaret, Edward, and our second unborn child. I wanted my kids to grow up in a loving environment where there was laughing at every meal, rather than condemning looks or deafening silence. Lily sprang with excitement upon learning that her grandparents will be residing with us. "That means, Mom, I get to eat Grandma's pancakes every morning." Her simple comments warmed my heart, so I nodded and gave her a hard hug. On the outskirts of the city, our new house overlooked undulating hills that, in the winter, were white with snow. I always woke up to the sounds of Daniel poring over new project ideas at the dining table, Margaret caring for the little garden in the backyard, and Lily and Edward chatting in the kitchen. And in those lovely, peaceful mornings, I at last got it. The family you create might occasionally be stronger than the one you are born into. And occasionally, life starts over, not despite the suffering, but because of it. Plans in his workspace. I didn't need anything else. I didn't exist to exact revenge. However, I survived to remember and to fully return compassion, because I thought that the most effective method to mend hurts and start over was to express gratitude at the appropriate time and place, a phase of genuine joy, needing no one's validation but my own heart. I had lost one relative. However, I had discovered another, and that was the best present I had ever received from life. Life proceeded in a tranquility I had before doubted I would ever experience. Back at school, Lily was content and in good health. Daniel oversaw the new branch of the business. We had Margaret and Edward living with us, and their warmth made our house a home. I believed that the old scars had all healed. That is, until my phone rang on my desk one late afternoon at the beginning of winter, displaying an unknown number. I paused for a few moments. Then it was picked up. "It's your mother, Claire." Through the telephone came a shaky voice. I held onto the phone tightly as memories suddenly came flooding back. It had been over 3 years since I last heard her voice. Not since the day I left that mansion with my heart broken. "I'm calling because we're in trouble," she added, her words trailing off. "The house is going to be seized by the bank. To keep the store open, your father took out a mortgage loan, but we are unable to repay it." I didn't answer. If you could help, I didn't want to trouble you. "The house may be saved for about $250,000. We will handle things on our own after that." I chuckled to myself, not with laughter, not out of rage, just a knowing, silent laugh, as though I'd been waiting for this call for ages. I calmly responded, "Mom, do you recall the last time I pleaded with you for assistance? Did my daughter require emergency surgery while she was in the hospital?" There was silence on the other end of the telephone. The sigh, long and broken. "I remember," I said. "Claire, I was mistaken. I wasn't thinking clearly at the time. I was unaware of the gravity of the situation. Not serious." My voice became icy. "A youngster on the verge of death, and you don't think that's serious?" Her voice broke into a sob as she gasped out, I'm sorry. I am aware that nothing can compensate for it. However, we are family." "Family," I said again. "In order to rescue their grandchild, the family sells their house. Not the person who raises a glass at a party and ignores the plea for life from their own blood." She said nothing. Then she said, "So, you won't assist?" I let out a sigh. "I'll assist. However, there is a requirement." Clinging to one last lifeline, she blurted out, "Anything. The money must be given to you and Dad in person at my business." "Yes," she said right away. They showed up at the scheduled time, 2 days later. My company's third-floor meeting room was flooded with winter sunlight. A sleek black bag with precisely $250,000 neatly packed in bunches lay on the table. I didn't see the dominant presence they used to have when they came in. My father appeared weak, with deep hollows behind his eyes and gray streaks in his hair. No longer the refined woman who once scolded my clothing for being too plain, my mother wore an outdated coat. Hesitant and at a loss for words, they sat across from me. I turned the suitcase toward them after opening it. "This is the money you need," I stated, making sure that every word was understood without raising my voice. "I don't want anyone to sleep on the streets, not because I still feel something for you. Not even the people who left me." I stopped my mother before she could reach for the suitcase. "Hold on," I replied, my eyes icy. "I want to say one thing before you take this money." They both gave me a glance. "I will no longer think of you as my parents as soon as you leave this room. No interaction, no trip, no demands. I will not be assisting again." My mom started crying. "You can't," said Claire. "I can," I interrupted her. "And I must, because I have to keep Daniel, Lily, Margaret, and Edward safe, because they are my real family. For me, they gave up everything. How about you? When your granddaughter was near death, what did you do?" Nobody responded, only hushed sobs, gloomy eyes. I got up and gave my aide a signal. "Please take our visitors out." As though clutching the last of his pride, my father gripped the suitcase. Without saying goodbye, they strolled right by me. I glanced down at my hands as the door closed behind them. Not shuddering, not wobbly, just be calm, as though the last page had been turned. No one chastised me when I informed Daniel and Margaret what had transpired that evening. Daniel just took my hand and held it. You made the correct decision. No one can match your strength. I gave a nod. However, I felt in my heart that this was not a win. It was only the conclusion, an end of a relationship that has broken too many times to be fixed. I had donated. However, I had also decided to hold on to what I valued most, my tranquility. And occasionally, that's all we need to proceed. I didn't hear from my parents again after that last meeting at my job. No phone calls, no letters. They showed no signs of wanting to get in touch. Oddly enough, I didn't feel empty or remorseful. Perhaps it was because I had really let go. I used to worry that I would feel bad about saying my last goodbyes to them. In actuality, though, all I experienced was relief. I was relieved that I didn't have to spend all of my energy proving myself to individuals who had never shown me true love. I was relieved to have made my decision. Those that reached out to save my child were the ones I chose, not the ones who backed off to avoid looking foolish. I didn't harbor any grudges. However, I also didn't forgive. To me, forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's not allowing the past to control my present. And my current home is a place where people laugh a lot, a steady job, a life that is full of thankfulness but not extravagant. There are moments when I question whether they will ever call again. Perhaps when they're ill. Perhaps in the event of Brandon's crisis. Perhaps when everything irreparably breaks down. And what am I going to do on that day? I don't have a definitive response. I'm a human. There are still inconsistencies in my emotions that reasoning cannot completely resolve. A portion of me still felt grief as I stood in front of my father and saw that he had aged 10 years in just one. However, I also recall that when I pleaded with him to save Lily, he turned away. I recall my mom holding her wine glass in place of my hand. I recall every detail. I haven't banged the door shut entirely, maybe because I remember it so clearly. However, I now hold that door in my hands, not as an open wound, but as the most important lesson I've ever learned. I don't tell this anecdote to disparage anyone, to avoid thinking about the past, and not to win them over. Since I know there are a lot of people who are just like me, I share it. People whose own families have broken them. People who thought that, simply because family links were mentioned, they had to suffer and make sacrifices. However, the reality is, your family does not include everyone who is related to you, and sometimes deciding to leave isn't harsh, rather, it's a self-saving decision. I wish to share this with you if you are torn between duty and suffering. You're not by yourself. You are entitled to establish limits. It is your right to love without being exploited. Even if it means leaving connections that previously seemed unbreakable, you have the right to defend yourself and those who deserve it. I wake up every morning in a warm and happy house these days. Every time Lily enters my room, she gives me a big embrace and whispers, "Last night, I dreamed you were a superhero, Mom." That one line alone reassures me that every difficult choice I've ever made was the right one. Daniel frequently remarks that I'm the strongest person he's ever encountered. I am unsure about my strength. However, I am aware of this. Having rebuilt my family from nothing but my two hands and an unwaveringly hopeful heart, I have learned to stand up for myself and my loved ones. If you've read this far, I have a question for you. What would you do if the people who have harmed you returned one day and asked for assistance? Would you assist them in demonstrating your superiority? Or would you refuse to be pulled back into the suffering and maintain your composure? Tell me what you think. I genuinely want to hear your tale, so please leave a comment below. Because perhaps we are all simply trying to figure out how to forgive somewhere in the puzzle pieces of life, or at minimum, how to gracefully let go. And keep in mind this if you've experienced something similar to what I have. Happiness is something you deserve. Peace is something you deserve. And you deserve a family that prioritizes you, whether it's your biological family or your own.